Recently, I did an AMA on the Nintendo Switch 2, so people can ask me anything that they want to know about the system that they were confused on, or if there's some misinformation, or whatever I can do to help them on my live streams, which we usually do if you have a chance to check out my live streams, the replays, or if you can make it out live. It's definitely interesting and it's fun because I answer so many questions every single day. But one of the things that I wanted to do now at this point, considering there's been a lot of it, is that I wanted to go over every bit of major misinformation that I see on the internet and that I've seen on like YouTube and Twitter and all of that. It's kind of pretty rampant at times. Things are cooling down a bit with Nintendo coming in and clearing up some of the stuff, but there still are people that are in my chat that I see on my comment section on Twitter and just everywhere that are spreading a lot of misinformation. Now, one thing that I want to make sure that it's very clear here, guys, is that misinformation doesn't mean that there isn't legitimate concerns and critiques. I have done that myself multiple times in terms of things that I see that need to be critiqued, or if I feel that, hey, this is not quite so right. So for example, Mario Kart World, in terms of the $80 price tag, I do think that there's some things they could do to alleviate that, right? Like obviously having it at 70, that would be great. That's a legitimate concern or critique from someone, just in my own opinion, right? It's not like it's misinformation, just my own critique. Or how about Welcome Tour, that game being bundled in with the Nintendo Switch 2? That's a legitimate critique or concern. You know, some of the prices when it comes to games, those are all that. But one thing that I want to make sure that what this video is, it's not being upset at people doing legitimate stuff in terms of their opinion. It's the misinformation being spread. So we're going to tackle that misinformation. So you have one spot with all of the correct information overall. So let's start off with $90 games. Now, this happened because after Nintendo's Nintendo Direct for the Nintendo Switch 2, people started looking for the price of games in the system, and there was people that saw 90 euros, right, in like European, and that factors in the points of the sale in addition to any sales taxes. So some journalists took that and converted it for some reason 1-to-1 to $90. And that's where we first got $90 games for this different type of stuff out there. So that is not correct. That is not true. And once again, it depends on what area in Europe you are. Some of them factor in the tax and everything else. Some don't. Here in the US, we don't factor in tax with the sale price. You will see the price of like $79.99, for example, right? And then depending on what state you live in, the tax is on top of that. So if you live in a state like California, that is a higher sales tax rate than maybe somewhere else like Texas or something like that, right? So it's different based on each state here in the US, whereas it's different in terms of Europe. So that's where the whole $90 game stuff came from. That's not true. Now let's get into the next thing, $80 games. Now this is correct for some games. Now, the games that are going to be $80, there's some interesting, I would say, dichotomy between those. Mario Kart World is the only game that is $80 outright in terms of here in the US, $80 for that game. The other $80 games are actually a bit different because they are standard games, whatever their MSRP was. So for example, like Kirby, that's a $60 game. Then they're charging 10 for the upgrade, and then they're charging 10 for the extra big DLC. So it comes out to $80, but it's not a $80 game. If you already have Kirby in the Forgotten Land, you can just get the upgrade and you'll be good. You pay the $20, you get your new DLC, you get the upgrade. So you have to keep that in mind. The Nintendo Switch 2 editions are just the complete version of those, but on Nintendo Switch 2, you can still use that Nintendo Switch 1 game and then download the upgrade. So $80 games, there's really only one game. Also, same thing with Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. It's a $70 game plus the $10 upgrade. However, with that game, you can get a Nintendo Switch Online expansion pass, and then you'll get the upgrades for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild at no additional cost from there. But there's really only one true $80 game right now at this point, and that is Mario Kart World. So for example, Donkey Kong Bonanza, that is a $70 game. That game is coming out a month after the Nintendo Switch 2 launches in June, and that's a $70 game, not an $80 game. And they've already stated that there's going to be variable pricing. So maybe the next major 3D Mario game will be $80, or the next major Legend of Zelda game will be $80, but something like, let's say, Pikmin 5, for example, that might be $70 instead, or whatever. They might be $60 if they feel they can't get 70 for it. So I do think that things are going to be variable, like Nintendo already stated there, but that is the truth when it comes to $80 games for right now. But another truth is that there's going to be a bunch of people hitting that subscribe button if you're not subscribed yet, because you want the best and most accurate information on the Nintendo Switch 2. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're not subbed, hit that like button, and click that notification bell to get my vids as soon as they drop. Now let's get into the next bit of misinformation that I see on the internet, and that is game key cards and Nintendo Switch 2 cartridges. So the first thing that I saw is that all Nintendo Switch 2 physical games are going to be fake games with these game key cards, that they're all downloads. That is not true. All the games are not downloads. There's actually these things called game key cards, and essentially what game key cards are is that they are like a hollow, empty little key shell. It all contains a little bit of data or a key. You buy it at the store or wherever you get it from. You take that, you put that into your Nintendo Switch 2 system, and then that gives you a prompt to download the game to your system memory or an express micro SD card. And then from there, you have to do one boot up to connect to the internet to check the game. Then after that, you no longer have to do that. Now, some people have stated that it's tied to your account. That is also not true. It operates essentially like a physical game would, but just downloaded. You can take that same game key card and you can let your friend borrow it. You can sell it. You can do what you want with it overall. Like, they'll be able to play it. It's not tied to an account at all. It's very different from what Nintendo did with the code in the box stuff, at least never Nintendo first party, but third parties, where they would put a code in a box and then you just download that. That is tied to your account. It's actually pretty much the replacement for the partial cartridge that we got on the Nintendo Switch 1, where essentially you would buy a game like, let's just say Hogwarts Legacy, and it'd be like an 8 GB card. You have 8 GB of data, but the whole game doesn't run. You have to download the rest of the game. So it's a partial cartridge. So it's essentially the same thing, but it's probably a bit more favorable to the publishers when it comes to it, because they don't actually have to pay for any of the cart space at all. Now, when it comes to the consumers out there, it's better than a code in a box, and it's pretty much a lateral move from the partial cartridge. Although I do think with game key cards, more developers are going to be willing to have a retail presence in some form and release their games, because they don't have to actually use a cartridge and pay for that if their game is going to be like 60 or 70 gigabytes anyway. That's not going to fit on a Nintendo Switch 2 cartridge, which has a max capacity, from what we know, of 64 gigabytes. So just keep that in mind when it comes to game key cards. Not all games are going to be like that. There are Nintendo Switch 2 cartridges, like actual full Nintendo Switch 2 cartridges that have the game complete on there. So for example, Donkey Kong Bonanza, that game is not a game key card. Or another game is Mario Kart World, that is also not a game key card. That's actually on there. Plus another game that's coming out later from a third-party developer, Daemon X Machina, Titanic Scion, that's also not a game key card from what I understand. So game key cards will be written on the box and you'll be able to see it, compared to the regular standard cartridges that have the complete game. So it's essentially an all or nothing from what we've seen right now. And it's either going to be a game key card or it's going to be an actual on the cartridge game. No more partials, no more code in the box. These are the two options when it comes to physical overall. So that is the full truth with it. I'm not a huge fan of game key cards, but I understand, considering what we got with the Nintendo Switch 1 with partial cartridges and the size of games, it's almost like a necessary evil. If you want to get stuff like Street Fighter, or maybe if GTA 6 somehow comes to the Nintendo Switch 2, that's going to be way bigger than the 64 gigabyte cartridge that Cyberpunk 2077 is on. And I want to make sure that I stress that, yes, Cyberpunk 2077 is on a full Nintendo Switch 2 64 gigabyte cartridge. It's not a game key card as well. So let's get to the next thing here, and that is Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games. There's been a lot of confusion here. Now, originally, Nintendo put this out on their Direct saying, hey, look, there's these Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games, and essentially you can buy a cartridge, that's a full cartridge, and you get the game. There was no problem whatsoever. The misinformation and the confusion started when the Does It Play account somehow got some type of email from one of their users that essentially talked to Nintendo of UK and said that it's a download code in the box. So it's nothing that Nintendo actually said themselves. It's something that somebody else said that they talked to Nintendo UK support, and they essentially got that from them. So they said it was false advertising during the Nintendo Direct, but that's not necessarily the case. We've had multiple people reach out to Nintendo UK support, And we also have, I think Nintendo of Australia or something like that, Vooks reached out to them and they stated that the Nintendo Switch 2 edition games will come complete on cartridge, the upgrade pack, and the actual game. Everything is complete on there overall. Now there might be like, let's say, an update down the line or something like that that's extra, but the whole game can be booted up and played off of that without having to use a download code from what Nintendo has stated now at this point. So this one's just kind of like, what can you do? Like, it was going to happen because people are going to be inquisitive about things, and sometimes customer support doesn't always give the right answer. Or sometimes, in this case, I'm not even sure if that customer support was 100% real because of the background that they used compared to other people. When it comes to Nintendo support, it is a red background. This one was not red at all. It looked completely like it was recreated and not the actual authentic email, from what I understand, compared to other people asking questions to the same support staff. So I think that's questionable at best overall. But yeah, Nintendo Switch 2 edition games like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, Pokemon Legends ZA, Kirby and the Forgotten Land plus Star-Crossed Worlds, Super Mario Party Jamboree plus Jamboree TV, all of those are going to be the complete editions on the cart. So keep that in mind, guys. All right, next up, let's move to free Nintendo Switch 1 game updates. Yes, there are some major or paid updates for Nintendo Switch 2 edition games, but there are actually a number of free updates, and I'm guessing Nintendo will add more games as things goes along. So right now we have about 12 games that are going to be getting a free update, and according directly to Nintendo from their site, they're essentially saying that these free updates will improve the playability of the games on the Nintendo Switch 2. So if you take this Nintendo Switch 1 game and put it in the Nintendo Switch 2, you can connect to the internet and you can download free updates that may improve the performance of the game, add support for features such as game share in select games, but the contents of each of these updates will differ from each game. So right now we have a confirmed 12 games or so: ARMS, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Super Mario Odyssey, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, Game Builder Garage, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Big Brain Academy Brain vs. Brain, Pokemon Scarlet, and Pokemon Violet. That is something that people aren't talking about as much. They're kind of focusing on the Nintendo Switch 2 edition games, but there will be free updates for a number of games. This is just the beginning when it comes down to it. I suspect that Nintendo will add more games as we go along, because there has been information, for example, like Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, that there is a 60 frames per second mode hidden in the code. So I'm guessing they're priming that and getting it ready for an update on the Nintendo Switch 2. So I did see misinformation out there saying that all game updates for the Nintendo Switch 2 are going to be paid. That is not true. There are a number of free updates and probably more even coming in the future. All right, last thing here, and hopefully I got everything that was misinformation, was the chat button and controller support. So there's been a lot of talk about the Nintendo Switch 2, the new Pro Controller, and the chat button. Essentially, they added this little C button, and that C button connects you to the game chat thing that they have on the Nintendo Switch 2. So I've seen some say that that button is a required experience, and that's the only way you can access the game chat. So you have to use the Nintendo Switch 2 Joy-Cons or the button on there when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 Pro Controller, the C button. And that's also not true. You can use Nintendo Switch 1 controllers on the Nintendo Switch 2 system. Even with Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games, every Switch 1 official controller is going to be able to work. You want to use some Joy-Cons to play Metroid Prime 4, you can definitely do so. You're not going to get the mouse mode with that, with the new Joy-Cons that those offer, but you can still play Metroid Prime 4 Beyond with your Nintendo Switch 1 Joy-Cons. You want to use your Special Edition Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom controller to play Donkey Kong Bonanza, you can definitely do that as well. If you want to access the chat feature, all you have to do is go to the dashboard and hit the little chat icon that's on there. So you can access the chat feature without the actual Nintendo Switch 2 Joy-Cons or the Nintendo Switch 2 Pro Controller, the new one. Yes, it is going to be tied to the Nintendo Switch Online service, which, depending on what region you are, it's about $20 a year for that, but they are doing a 1-year free trial with that. So you don't need to be on NSO in order to get access to the chat feature. You're still going to need NSO to play games online, but if you want to game chat with someone else and do that offline, or if you want to just have like a different game that you're playing and see their game, that whole service with the whole game chat and all of that, that's going to be available for 1 year in terms of it being free. So those are the actual facts with it. I personally feel, if I want to get on just my own personal opinion, that it should just be included, maybe not the video chat, but just the basic chat for free for everybody. But that's just my opinion overall on it. So those are all of the bits of misinformation that I've seen on the internet. If you guys have any questions, you can always reach out to me on Twitter, or you can come through to the live streams as well. We're always answering questions, talking and discussing and going over the good and the bad and making the best decision for you guys as the consumers. So what do you guys think about all of this in terms of what I had to say? Is there any other misinformation that you want me to clear up? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out all my other Nintendo Switch 2 content, like this video right here that goes over what some of the developers are talking about when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 power. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.